of Affect Autism's podcasts are produced and edited by Daria Brown. Please note that the views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved, do not constitute educational or medical advice, and do not necessarily reflect the views of Affect Autism, Daria Brown, nor ICDL and associated parties. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with their individual circumstances for specific support.
You're listening to the We Chose Play podcast from Affect Autism, where affect is the #1 tool we use in supporting development through playful interactions. We are speaking with Rae Leeper from the Rebecca School in Manhattan, which is a DIR, a Developmental, Individual Differences, Relationship-Based Model School. And welcome, Rae.
Thank you so much for having me.
And tell everyone what your role is at the Rebecca School.
I am the Educational Supervisor at the Rebecca School, and I have been around since we opened in 2006.
Wow. So yes. You've been there from the start.
I've worn many hats and had several job titles over the few years, but yes, I've been an Educational Supervisor here for going on 7 years.
Oh, well, it's great to speak with you then. So correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Gil Tippy and Dr. Stanley Greenspan were the ones who created the Rebecca School.
Along with Tina McCourt, our director. So Tina and Gil really collaborated with Dr. Greenspan to kind of dream up what would it look like to bring DIR into a school setting.
And do you know, is the Rebecca School the first DIR school?
I don't know if someone else is out there. I think one of the beautiful things about DIR schools is oftentimes they can be quite small. So, I often will speak to families or parents or practitioners who have a school, in a church basement or in, a level of their house. I think we're probably one of the first, if not the first, schools to really have like a brick and mortar building. And we started with, 40, 45 kids. So we started sort of larger than most schools and then have grown, exponentially since. So I think in terms of, I don't think we're a traditional school in a lot of ways, but in terms of having, a school building with a structure and a business plan and a relationship with the Board of Ed and those kinds of things, I think we are one of probably the first official DIR schools in the country, at least.
So let's talk a little bit about the Rebecca School. It's in the heart of Manhattan, and it is in a high-rise.
Yes.
So there are many floors, and you service children from 3 to 21, so
yes.
Children to young adult.
Yes.
And how many students does the school currently have?
We have 138 students currently, and we're opening up another classroom in November. So we are expanding, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what does the setup of the school look like? Is it classrooms? Are there one-on-one instruction for certain kids? How are the kids grouped?
Yeah. So we have classroom settings for all students. Our classrooms range in number of students from 7 to 10 children, depending on sort of the needs and appropriateness of the group. We are roughly grouped by age. We're not going to have like a 4-year-old in a class with a 15-year-old. But for us, we really think about what is the appropriate developmental makeup for each individual student. We really try to have mixed groupings for students. We're not the kind of school that has, a classroom that's quote unquote, one classroom is quote unquote academic and another classroom sort of quote unquote pre-academic or anything like that, because we think that it's really important for all students to have the opportunity to be a leader and also a follower, depending on the skill set, and that we all learn so much from each other when we are, pushed to communicate in different ways. That being said, we want to make sure that students have appropriate peers, and so that every kid has a kid that they can truly be friends with. And another thing that's a thing that we think quite thoughtfully about is having girls have another girl in their class. And so what that often means for some of our female students is that they're often placed in classrooms where they're the only girl. That's not to say that they're going to automatically be friends with the other girl in the class, but it's at least nice to have that option to have a female peer. And we also think very thoughtfully about the sensory needs of our students. So we want to think about the balance of the room and think about, if we have 8 students, how can we have 8 students that can share the space together in a meaningful and productive way? So if we have 8 kids that really are intense sensory seekers, that might be very challenging for them to feel safe and secure in the classroom. So we have the flexibility, because we do have quite a few number of classrooms at each age level, to really create a balance in every classroom.
That's great. And my understanding is you have an interdisciplinary team?
Yes. So we have occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, music therapy, counseling, and social work support. We also have adaptive physical education, and we have an art teacher. And we also have a music therapist who pushes into the classroom and does group music as well. So, and we're lucky that we're rich in resources in that way. But, as the advocate for classrooms, it's really important for me that the classrooms feel like a safe and secure home for our students, and that we want to try to integrate therapies as much as we can into the classroom environment. We absolutely have pullouts when it's appropriate, but we first and foremost want to think about how do we help that student have the most productive and most integrated day that they can. So I think when we first began the Rebecca School, because we were trying to take, floor time is a model that was sort of developed one-on-one and sort of quiet therapeutic settings. So it did take some sort of translating to figure out, okay, how do you follow 8 leads?
Right.
If we're thinking about really embracing kids' individual differences, what about if their individual differences conflict with each other? So what if one of them really wants the lights off, and one of them really wants the lights on, right? A very simple example such as that. And I think one big sort of turning point for us as a school is to really move beyond the clinic model, so that kids are not being sort of pulled out and they get this great sensory support. We have fantastic OTs that do really interesting integrative sensory work. And then they're put back into a classroom and sort of dropped off and then get immediately dysregulated, right? And so that kind of defeats the purpose of this beautiful work. And so what we've really done over the years is thinking about how to not only integrate therapists into the classroom in meaningful ways, but also to train TAs and teachers, so that I think about teachers as sort of, obviously we're experts in education, but it's almost like the lazy Susan approach, where you sort of have all the disciplines and the tools, and not to say that a teacher is ever going to be the same as an occupational therapist, but they have some tools in their toolkit to work from. So if they're doing a reading lesson, the OT might collaborate with the teacher during that lesson and be in the room, or the OT is consulted with the class, and so the teacher and the TAs know what kind of seating the students need, which kids need to go to the sensory gym right before. Maybe if we're doing, let's say, bear hunt, we're going to incorporate a bunch of Thinking Goes to School movements as part of the reading activity, so that I really like to think about the classroom as an integrated therapy space. It's not just like, this is where we, quote unquote, do our academics, and then this is where we do our therapy, that it's really, we want our kids to be integrating those things together all day long.
Okay, a couple of questions about what you said. What is bear hunt, and what is Thinking Goes to School?
Yeah, bear hunt is, we're going on a bear hunt. It's a popular children's book. I believe it's by Michael Rosen, and it has this beautiful sort of rhythmic, sing-song pattern where the family goes on a hunt to find a bear, and they go through the water and the woods and the forest. And so there's opportunity to do a lot of movement and acting out, as well as, there's a part where they go through squishy mud. And so we might make like a sensory bin and where some of those pieces out. Again, like really blurring the lines between, for me, when things are cooking the way they should, you go into a classroom and you're not really sure whose job is what. That for me is really that's like the goal. Again, it's not that we want speech therapists to be OTs and teachers to be PTs, but that I think we all, a truly interdisciplinary team, speaks the same language. And we all have our area of expertise that we can go back to, but that we have a shared common goal of understanding that when we look at a kid as a whole kid in all the different domains together, they're going to do better. Thinking Goes to School, right, is a program developed by Dr. Harry Wax, who is actually a good friend of Dr. Greenspan. And it's a series of visual spatial activities that are aimed to really help integrate the vision and the body together. So what we find is that a lot of our students, a lot of their academic challenges are very tied into how their sort of brain and eyes process their environment, print, etc., right? So if a kid is having some challenges picking up sight words, there could be a real issue with them functionally using their eyes to scan print. So we work very closely with the occupational therapists and the physical therapists who do a lot of like sort of crossing the midline types of activities, visual tracking activities, adapted kind of yoga moves, all of these things aimed at really rewiring the way in which kids are using their eyes and brains together. So it's not just, okay, you know, how do I see in terms of 20/20 vision? It's how am I processing the visual space around me, and how am I understanding my own body and space? Those are the kinds of things we're thinking about when we work on Thinking Goes to School.
So it sounds like kids are mostly in the classroom, but they sometimes get pulled out, but all of these different therapies are sort of integrated into the day, and it's individualized for each child. Like you said, some children might need to go to a sensory gym and get some body movement before they have a certain type of lesson. Mm-hmm. So what is the ratio of adult staff to children? And you mentioned TAs. Are you also sort of a teaching environment where student teachers come and help out?
So our model is one head teacher, and then we are 2-to-1 model. So it's 2 students to 1 adult. We're not 1-to-1 in the classroom, but when you start to add in the therapists and support staff, we do have a significant amount of adults. But our program was designed to not be a 1-to-1 teaching model. We really wanted to move away from that 1-to-1 model because, the motto of our school is learning through relationships. And we wanted kids to really understand that learning is about collaborating with others. And that we found that the one-on-one model sort of comes from oftentimes sort of a clinic setting and oftentimes sort of an ABA setting as well. And that some of our kids could do really well in a quiet environment with one adult. But then the second that they're with a peer or in a group, hard time integrating those skills across environments. So we want kids to have learning environments that are soothing and predictable, but also our classes tend to be raucous sometimes, and our hallways are busy and kids are playing chase, and it's also New York City, so maybe our thresholds are a little bit higher anyway. But we want this to be a rich and affect-driven environment, and sometimes that means that it's a little bit like sort of louder and a little sort of more robust than kind of these 1-to-1 sort of cubicle-like settings. So our classrooms are one head teacher, and then if there's 8 students in the class, there'll be 3 TAs. If there's 9 students in the class, there'll be 4 TAs. We do have a handful of students that do have a 1-to-1 para. Oftentimes that's somebody, a student that might require more hands-on support for sort of medical needs, or, we do have some kids that just being in the classroom can just be very, very challenging for them in general. And so they need that more intensive level of support. So that para or that 1-to-1 is there to help support them out of the classroom in kind of like a quiet room kind of setting, or in the gym or in the hallway. And then, with the goal to integrate them with the class as much as possible.
And are the TAs employees of the school, or are they students from university that come in?
Yeah, the TAs are employees of our school. We do have a lot of students from, either teaching, occupational therapy, speech therapy that come in and out. And that's been a wonderful way to, teach other people about floor time, and as well as a potential for hiring people. I mean, it's really the ideal situation to train people for 6 months, and then hopefully they can grow into the position if there's one available for them here. So yes, we do have sort of one of our missions is really that of teaching and learning. Every day, every week on Fridays, the students leave at 12:30, 1 o'clock, and then we have Friday afternoons for staff training. So we understand that what we're doing is challenging, and that some of our students have, incredibly complex sensory, learning, emotional profiles, and we really want to honor the space that we're all learning and growing together, and we want to make sure there's that time and space to do that.
So I want to hear a little bit more about the staff training that happens on a weekly basis, but also how are the logistics of just simple drop-off and pickup in the heart of Manhattan?
Oh, yes.
And what do kids do Friday afternoons?
Yes. So drop-off and pickup here, students do come on buses for the most part. Students in New York typically are not bus students, so the typical New York kid will often get dropped off by their parent and in the morning, by foot, or older students will often ride the subways on their own. So most school buses in New York are students who have an IEP, or busing is part of their IEP. So most of our students come on buses. Every day is with a sense of humor and calmness, because sometimes it can be quite tricky. But yeah, students start to arrive and we sort of slowly bring them off the bus, so that there's never too many kids, hopefully, in the lobby at one time. We are a vertical campus. So we're not on all floors, but our building is 12 floors, and the top floor is a rooftop playground with very high fencing. But in New York City, a lot of schools have rooftop playgrounds. But we started a very slightly unpopular with the students plan this year to really take the stairs a lot more, to shut down, some of the elevator waiting. And also it's really good for them and all of us, our cardio systems, and to get that input in the stairs. So, that's helpful to kind of slow down some of the thing. Friday afternoons, kids do a variety of different things. Some kids go home. Some kids go to after-school programs. We collaborate. So none of the programs are run out of this, they're not part of the school, but we sort of contract with private sort of after-school programs, and they will have periodically things in the school. So there's a yoga thing that happens some afternoons. There's a soccer club that happens. A lot of grandmas pick up their kids on Fridays. So it sort of depends on the student.
And what is the staff training that happens on Fridays?
Yeah, so every week it's a little different. This year we started a really exciting initiative where we have collaborated with an institute that's doing a series of 10 weeks on mindfulness training with the staff. And so that's an hour every Friday. We find that this work, like a lot of us experience, is wonderful and beautiful, and we all feel really lucky to do it. It also can be really exhausting and really emotional. And I think especially for, for all of us, but for some people who are newer to the field, it can really be a lot to sort of hold by the end of the week. So we, for several years now, have had a series of what we call process groups, where various mental health professionals that work in the building run groups. And some of them are sort of talk groups, some of them are music therapy groups, some of them are art groups. And Gail Tippy, our clinical director, has been running a mindfulness group for a number of years. And that has slowly become more and more popular. I think just as people end their week, having a practice to let go, and to also, so much of floor time is just being present, right? Like not having this huge agenda, but really tuning in to who this kid is or who this group of kids is in this exact moment, being present with them. I just, we started this phone call a little bit late, 25-minute conversation with a group because we were eating lunch together. A lot of us like to eat lunch with the kids. So, I was eating lunch with them and I had rice in my lunch and 4 other kids had rice in their lunches. And it started this beautiful conversation about, honestly, sort of about like multicultural families and who eats rice and how do you cook rice and what kind of rice do you eat, and that every family cooks it a little bit differently. What does that mean, right? So gone in with my own agenda, that wouldn't have happened, right? So for us, being mindfully present, being available, being open to where the kids are is really crucial for us. And we feel like mindfulness is a really important tool. So we've been doing that we'll be doing that for the next few Fridays. On Wednesday afternoons for an hour, we do a full school case conference with Dr. Tippy, who runs it. When we first opened the school, Dr. Greenspan would run them. We called them Greenspans. We still call them Greenspans. So we sort of talk about a particular student. The family might come in and go over the student's milestones, and the team presents. So that's Wednesday. Tuesday afternoons, we meet for an hour in teams and talk about students. And then Friday afternoons, we've been doing this mindfulness training, but we also have an hour-long something else, some other kind of training. So oftentimes it might be focused on, problems, shared problem solving, how to promote capacities for. Another week it might be the occupational therapist presenting on how to integrate more sensory strategies into your sessions and classrooms. So it really, it sort of rotates like what our topics are.
And are some of those YouTube videos on Dr. Tippy's YouTube channel from those staff trainings?
You recognize the padding of our gym in the background. Yeah.
Great. And talk a little bit about the parent involvement in your school, because you mentioned that the parents are there when you do case studies about the children and review how the children are doing, and the parents are actually there. So how do you involve the parents, and are the parents really aware of the DIR model and about floor time?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, the way that we begin is that we really see parents as collaborators. That's really important to us. I surely know that it's a humbling experience. We're really here, we're like sprinters, but parents are really there for the marathon. So we want to collaborate with parents, and we know that parents really are the experts of their own children. And so we have a series of parent trainings. And trainings, to me, is kind of the wrong word for it in some ways, because yes, we're training them in floor time, but it's also about like, you tell us about your kid too. In what ways do you find joy? What are the things that you love to do at home? The teachers do home visits with families at the beginning of the year with the social workers, and we have parents fill out what I call a passion profile for their student, where they just share with us sort of, what do you guys like to do as a family? What are some of the things that your kid loves? Tell us a funny story. So we just, in what ways can we really capture this kid's, gleam in the eye? And parents are really the ones that know it the best. I think parents come to us with a variety of different knowledge bases about DIR. Some of them come because they're like, I want DIR, I love floor time, I've read all of Greenspan's books, and I feel very committed to it. Others, come to us because they know that we have a very specific therapeutic program, and they feel like their student really needs more support than a more traditional setting. So we sort of have the full range of things. And really our job is to help parents to understand what our goals are, but also to really integrate what their goals are as well into their kids' programs. So yes, we have staff that do parent trainings continually. Once parents have gone through some basic DIR trainings, we have, pretty much an open door policy with parents where they can come and spend time in the classroom with their students. We want it to be at a time that's functional for the classroom. But we want parents to feel welcome into classrooms. We love it when families send us videos from home, and we send videos from school about what we're doing and working on together. And also from a curricular level, we want to encourage families to share things that are important for them in their homes and their home cultures. And so we'll have parents sometimes come in and share, like cooking activity that they do at home. Or we had one of our staff members, actually, her father is a police officer, and we have a student that's very passionate about the NYPD. So he came in and spoke with this student. It was like this kid's sort of peak experience. So we want it to be a collaboration, because I think it's really important that parents feel invited in, and they don't feel like we're these experts kind of telling them what to do, because that just is, first of all, it's just false. It's just not true. Like, they're going to know their own child better than we ever will. It's just that we have a different set of tools, and that's our goal, is to kind of share those tools with parents so that they have more options for how to help support their children at home.
That sounds fantastic. And just for it to be so welcoming to families must be such a relief for the parents to know that their children are safe and taken care of. We did a blog at Affect Autism with a podcast with Dr. Tippy a few weeks ago called Foundation Academics. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the programming at the school. So
sure.
Certainly parents are always concerned about their children being on track with their, the age that they are. They should be on track with their academics. But Dr. Tippy told us how important it is to build that early developmental foundation, the early capacities that the DIR model talks about, the D for development. How does the school incorporate academics and those early foundational capacities? Yeah.
For us, it's really important that we think about all of the elements that go into, quote unquote, being ready for academics. So I think that there are a lot of assumptions about children at certain ages, right? It's like, you're 9, so now you're ready for X. You're ready for division and, multi-paragraph writing or whatever. And for us, we want to think about, are you thinking? Are you thinking? Are you communicating? And are you able to negotiate and be in an environment with other people? That's first and foremost. So some of the things that we do look a lot like any other school in terms of sitting in a group and reading stories and discussing things together. I think what's a lot of things that are sort of underlying that might not seem like quote unquote academics are things like obstacle courses, sensory diets, our lunch program where kids are either cooking their own lunch or at least setting the table, washing dishes, all those things, which seem like, okay, those are kind of ADL skills, but actually there's a ton of sequencing involved in all of those kinds of activities. And what I want for my students is, what I find is that a lot of kids are fantastic at relying on their memories, and they have incredible visual memories. And that's a real skill, and we want to really support that. However, you cannot rely on your memory alone. That will not get you through. So for me, it's about deepening. It's not just like, okay, next skill, next grade, next. It's, do you actually understand what this concept is? So a good example of what we might do here is our literacy program is heavily influenced by fairy tales. We use a lot of both like sort of traditional, Three Little Pigs and Three Billy Goats Gruff, but we also do things like, I would consider some of like the Mo Willems books to be kind of like fairy tale-like. Bear Hunt is another favorite one. And for some of our older students, it might be something like Robin Hood or Jack and the Beanstalk, right? So you take something like that, and for some of our students, they can read text at like a 6th grade level. But then when you ask them, well, why did they do that? Why was that important? That's really hard for them. So oftentimes what we'll do is that we'll work on texts that are, the print is below, quote unquote, their reading level, but comprehension is far above it. So that we want to think very thoughtfully about which part of their sort of skill set are we taxing at what point, so that we don't max them out on all of the things. So if I really want to design a lesson where I'm having a complex conversation with them about good and evil and right and wrong and these sort of gray area questions that I think as a country we're really struggling with, right, at a really sort of grand level, you can have that conversation about Three Little Pigs, right? So you can talk about, like, is the wolf bad? Well, what do you think? And like, well, wolves eat pigs. What does that mean for them? And why did they put that pot of water there? What do you think they were thinking? So all of these conceptions about trickery, deception, and perspective taking, which fundamentally is really like a universal challenge for most of our students, you can play those out in safe spaces like fairy tales. So that's a good example, I think, of the ways in which we are using, literacy, read alouds, acting things out, readers theater. Some of our kids will create like play versions of their own characters. Like we've done Sonic and the Beanstalk, and they adapt the fairy tales to incorporate their, but also at like a very base level, it's about not just answering what happened, but why did it happen? Why is that important? Why do you think that character said that? When they told that secret, they closed the door. Why? What do you think? What do you think that was about, right? Because ultimately, I want my students to understand their worlds. That's what I think my students are most at risk for, are being really amazing at compensating, but kind of being a little left out of the conversation. And I want them to be active participants.
So how do you inspire the transition in a child who's clueless when you say, why did they do that? What do you think they were thinking? Mm-hmm. What is it that is done over and over again that helps the child learn, that isn't repetitive memory based?
Right. I think affect. Affect is the real key. So we might act it out with the adults. The kids think that's hilarious, especially if you tape it, because they're like, this is crazy. You guys are here after school? Like, like what? There's these like adults in silly costumes or whatever. But, really like repeating things over and over, and not because of memory, but one of the beauties of literacy is that literacy pages don't change. That can be a bad thing, right? If you just keep reading the same books in the same way. But if you want to think about comprehension, it's really, for kids who can get very lost socially, they can work out some of these things in a book because it's not going to change. Whereas if their friend says something and they misunderstood it, and then it's over, right? Mm-hmm. And it's hard, as an adult, you can try to slow it down and bring it back, but it's kind of hard to recreate some of those like misconnections for kids. And what I find is that when kids start to get some of those concepts, like someone might not always say what they mean, right? Like that's a really hard concept, but it's really essential. Mm-hmm. Especially for our teenagers, right? Is that I don't want them to be taken advantage of. So I want to have explicit conversations about deception. And there's ways to do that at a lot of different developmental stages. I remember one of my teachers had this really hilarious sort of curriculum, I would say, or lessons about sort of white lies. And she would do things like put a pack of gum on the table, and like, the teacher, one of the adults would leave the room and she'd take a piece and be like, oh, okay, don't tell them, and like sort of setting up these situations where kids are stuck in this sort of moral gray area where you have to really kind of figure out, and there's no really right answer, right? There's not a right answer. Like, I guess you are lying, right? If you say don't take it. But these are the things I think our kids really need to think about, and they need sort of more explicit, I wouldn't even say lessons, but really like learning environments where they're immersed in these situations where people can help unpack some of the complex social dynamics of real relationships.
I know that Dr. Tippy had told the story when I heard him speak once, that some of the older kids might have a project they're going to do, and they'll plan it out for, a few weeks even, and we're going to go to the store and we're going to get these supplies, and the day finally comes and they all go outside and they just stand there. And the teacher waits until someone says, "Aren't we going?" Oh, right. And then you go to the corner and the light's red and then green and then yellow and then red and then green and then yellow. Aren't we going to cross the street? Oh, right. So I know our time is winding up here, but can you talk a little bit about how doing that kind of, having the kids come up with what's going to happen helps this developmental process?
Yeah. Well, again, I think sometimes it's really important the intention in which you go into those kinds of activities as an adult, because I think there's a way that you can do it where it's not respectful, right? Where you're just kind of like, we'll wait, that sort of condescending, annoyed sort of tone. That's really, really different from like, what do you want to do? And what our students are really over-prompted, all of them, at all developmental stages and all ages. And I think that comes from a deep love from all the people around them. But what that ends up doing is that it sort of teaches kids they can't do it, right? And it also sort of sets the tone that like, well, if I just wait long enough, someone will solve this problem for me. So for us, again, sort of going back to that mindfulness piece, it's like, we're not in a rush. We will just take the time. So if you guys want to make pancakes, that's a great idea. We'll make pancakes. But I'm not going to go get every single ingredient, print out a recipe, and put it on the table. I might do that for certain kids that need more support, right? I'm not just going to stand there with my hands up and like give no scaffolding. Maybe I'll get the ingredients the first time they do it, right? Or whatever. But ultimately, the goal is how do you go from having an idea to communicating that idea in the space of a relationship with a trusted person and then execute it to the end? And kids need lots and lots and lots and lots of practice of that. So for me, it's like they're highly capable people. I know they are. And it's just about allowing them the time and space to figure those pieces out and knowing as an adult the just right challenge. There are times when you're going to kind of step in and help them be successful because they kind of need a win and you just don't want the whole world to feel hard for them. But there are also times when it's like, you can do this and we'll wait and support you and figure out how this didn't work. I keep coming back to a story of a student who I'm still in touch with. He's fantastic. He's 22 and doing great. When he was much younger, when he was maybe 15, he used to come to school on his own on the subway. And there was one day, New York City subways are, often not running the way they should be, especially this past summer. Here late working. It was probably an hour later, and he came back to the building. It had been an hour. And we were like, what are you doing? And he was like, well, the train's down. And he just stood there for an hour.
Wow.
And like he had a cell phone. He didn't use it. Like, this is a kid who like went to a fairly typical high school before he came to our school, right? So in a lot of ways, I think people would not have expected him to need that level of support. And I think that was a real wake-up call for us, that like he was completely independent if everything went exactly the way it was supposed to go. But the second something sort of unexpected popped up, he didn't really have a lot of tools. So that's something that is never really very far from my mind in terms of how do we help in any developmental stage. And I think this can happen at all stages. It's not just kids on the subway. It's really Okay, you're hungry. Okay, then what? Where's your lunchbox? Or where's the snack? Or I'm not just going to get everything and put it out for you.
Right.
There are ways to do it at all ages and stages to help kids be as autonomous as they can.
That's great. And like, I remember seeing a video with Dr. Greenspan where he said, imagine, and this was a totally different context, but, imagine something happening this way. So let's use the example of you doing something for a child 1,000,000 times versus over the course of a few years, inspiring the child to help do it for themselves 1,000,000 times. What's going to be the result at the end of those few years? And how is the brain going to develop differently because of those experiences? So, yeah, that's great. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us today. One last question, which may or may not be that interesting, but who is Rebecca?
Rebecca is the person that helped to open Rebecca School. So one of our investors, it was his grandmother. So it was named after her. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rae Leeper, who is the Educational Supervisor at the Rebecca School in Manhattan, a Developmental Individual Differences Relationship-Based Model School. Thank you so much, Rae.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, please share it with someone, like and subscribe, sign up for the newsletter at affectautism.com, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. Until next time, here's to choosing play and experiencing joy every day.